have brought about changes for deaf children and have had such a dramatic impact on their listening and talking. Who would have thought that the field of deaf education would have changed so much over the course of these particular 40 years, more than 40 actually, but Ann said if I say how many years, they'll know how old I am, providing so much for us to study. And I would like to say that we're both continuing to work together and to collaborate with others. And in fact, this afternoon, before this, which required me to then have 2 glasses of wine, we were meeting with a group to brainstorm about another avenue that we might be investigating regarding children with cochlear implants. So now, Ann, mostly, and a little bit me, would like to turn to discuss with you some of the people that had a great influence on us and that we'd like to recognize at this time. Many of you may not know them, and so Ann has brought along pictures so you can have something to
These people were an inspiration to us, and some of you will have known them when they were alive, and for those of you who didn't, I want you to see them. And of course, the first on that list, this feels like the Academy Awards. These are, a lot of these people are deceased, and you will never get to know them, but they were wonderful people. Dick Silverman, he was director of CID for many years, and he primarily encouraged Jean Moog to stay in this field in spite of the fact that she kept having children and saying, I can't do this anymore, I gotta stay home and take care of my kids. He's, come on, you can take one course, you can take one course. If it wasn't for Dick Silverman, she wouldn't even be here. So we want to thank.
So that was really good for him, and I said to him, this is ridiculous, I'm not ever going to do anything in this field. Do you know how hard it is to take care of 5 children at home? No, you never know, he said. That's going to happen. And so it took me 9 years to get my master's degree. Some of you that work on a doctor's degree would wonder about that. During that time we had 5 children. I think it was because I had interviewed with someone later, and I found out that I had told someone that how I got into the field was after 2 weeks of marriage, I was so bored I had to find something to do. And Alva wanted to make sure I wasn't bored anymore. So that's kind of how it happened. So WashU did change the rules after my graduation and said you could not take 9 years anymore. And I think now it's limited to 6.
They may have missed some great opportunities. I have to thank.
Just press the right arrow.
Right arrow.
There you go.
Okay, now I have to thank my friend, colleague, mentor, dissertation supervisor, everything, Ira Hirsch. He kept me funded for many years through something they called a program project grant from NIH, which allowed you to keep people funded under general principles. And he inspired me. And he got me working in psycholinguistics, and he served as a counselor to Jean and I for many, many years.
More to you than.
And I don't know how many of you remember this guy, but this is Donald Calvert. He took over after Dick Silverman as director, and he, I'd say he was responsible more than anybody else for our working together. He kept encouraging us. We had offices by happenstance near each other and started working together, and he simply encouraged this work to continue and continue. And then he kept adding jobs on. He, you know, Jean became head of the school, and I became head of the clinics. And then we had to teach in the training program. And then he wanted us to get NIH grants. So this guy got more work out of us than anybody ever could have. So we have a lot to say about Donald Calvert. Yep.
I think, and he was the one really that came to me shortly after I was, before I was the principal of the school, and I said, these deaf children are not learning fast enough. They could really learn faster. He said, really? Well, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, I haven't figured it out yet. He said, well, you figure it out and you let me know what we need to do for deaf children to learn faster. And that was the birth of the AVEd project. He said, do you want to teach one-on-one all day long, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, I'll give you a schedule and everything, what we're going to do. And he said, good, because I want to put our money where your mouth is.
Norm Erber. Some of you may remember Norm Erber. This is a current picture of Norm, so you know he's an Australian now. He's responsible for a lot of early speech perception testing of deaf children, the GASP, the monosyllable trochee-spondy test. Audiology was his training, but he taught us that the deaf children had abilities that could be described and measured individually, and that progress along those lines could be measured. And like nobody had ever done before, he set up hierarchies for describing the behavior of deaf kids. And we applied to language a lot of what he did in speech perception. So his forethought, we followed.
He really looks old, though.
Frank Lefner, probably not many people remember Frank, but he was a clinician par excellence. He was one of the best clinicians we've ever met. He knew how to analyze children's behavior like nobody I've ever seen before. And I think both of us were taught by him.
Absolutely.
And learned a lot about analyzing children's behavior from Frank.
He could tell a child's IQ by watching him for 15 minutes.
You
and
got
he was
it,
right on target, and so that was really very, very interesting. Okay, so Tina looks like the only one in the room old enough to
No,
remember.
I used to do that too. He taught me how.
I have to thank this person did not work here. This is Judith Cooper from the NIDCD. And early on, when Jean and I first went in for NIH funding, we didn't know what we were doing. And most of the research funding in deafness was sign language research. And we wanted to do research with oral deaf kids and the development of spoken language. And she was our champion. We went through review after review after review, and she was there saying, yes, I think they have a point. I think they have something worth looking at. I know they're not looking at sign language, but this spoken language thing in deaf kids, it's worth looking at. This is way before Cochlear.
I think she said it might catch on.
It might catch on. So we have a big debt to pay to Judith Cooper. And then there's this guy.
Okay, that's George Nofer. George Nofer was the executive director of the Obercutter Foundation, and one way to describe him is that he believed in us and he enabled us to continue research when NIH was taking their time, so we should say, between grants. George was a very interesting person. The first time that I met him, he called up Don Calvert, and he said, I represent the Obercutter Foundation, and I'd like to come and talk with you. And Don said, called me in his office, and he said, this guy called me up. His name is George Nofer, the Obercutter Foundation. I don't know anything about it. He wants to come and talk to us. I think he wants to give us some money. I don't know how much money, but you need to come up with a project that no matter how much money he wants to give us, that he can pick and choose and hopefully give us everything you ask for. So we had just got the NIH grant for the sensory aids study at CID, mostly to prove that cochlear implants actually do not work. It's just something that the implant companies are trying to sell, and the research on it has been very, very bad. So we thought we could do some decent research, and we would compare cochlear implants with vibrators that kids wore and hearing aids. And NIH had given us the grant, but we hadn't got the money yet. And they said, the reviewers wanted you to make sure that all the children in the study were funded so that it would not be skewed by who could pay for the grant. Okay, so for the tuition, excuse me. And so Don and I went to the Whittemore house and had lunch with George. And in the conversation, Don said, he was trying to find out where we stood, and he said, well, George, one of the things that we're looking for money for is the Hallowell Davis chair. We need $50,000 more in order to finish the funding on that chair. And I was thinking $50,000 sounded pretty good to me, but I said, and George turned to him and he said, well, the Oberkotter Foundation does not really fund endowments. They gave a business endowment to an endowment to a business school, and they said bad things about UPS, which is, of course, where Oberkotter came from. And he said, but if it's just $50,000, then I think we could, look past that. So John and I were looking at each other. So then we got back to his office, and he said, well, tell me about this grant. I said, well, the problem is that NIH says we must come up with tuition fees for all of the children in the study. And that's going to be $1.5 million. And so we're looking for how we're going to raise that. And he said, well, what will you do if we don't give you the money? I said, oh, we're going to work very hard. We'll go out to all the funders, the teachers, everybody, and try and raise this money. All the overpaid teachers, right? And so he said, oh, that would be a terrible waste of your time. You shouldn't be out having to get money. And then he gave us the whole thing. So that was our introduction to George, and it was a great relationship for a long time.
But I told Smithy that before this that I was going to thank him for he is our statistician, our design consultant for many, many, many years, and I said that I was going to thank him for his contribution to our research, and would he send me a recent picture? And his reply was, I don't have anything that I'm willing for you to show in public. It was fit for public consumption, but he said, just tell folks that I bear a striking resemblance to Clint Eastwood and respond to ill-behaved data much the way his character, Dirty Harry, would. So, Mike Strube, thank you. Couldn't have done it without you. Emily, my gosh. Emily has been working with us for many, many, many years. We discovered her in Acoustical Society, and she knew so much about speech development in normal hearing kids that we didn't know. And when kids began to get cochlear implants, speech really became to be a big issue. And she started with us, teaching us a whole lot about speech and how to measure speech and the development of speech and how speech and hearing are related, and it continues to this day. So, and of course, then she took me on, and when I had to move to Paradise, to work in Paradise, and still do what I love to do.
Okay, I would just like to add one little thing about Emily, because she was telling about how she stayed at our house. So one night, one evening, she and Ann and I were all meeting in the dining room at our house. And after the meeting was, or while it was going on, I heard that Betsy went into the other room and said, do you realize that those are the 3 most brilliant women in the country that Jean is sitting with. So that was really good. And you should have studied the Bible while we left that on your table.
And finally, the person that I could not do any of this without is Chris. Where's Chris? There's Chris. I mean, she's been my right arm for 30 years. I would not be living in the mountains of North Carolina and working on NIH grants or publishing papers or doing anything if it wasn't for Chris. And of course, I have to thank my major motivation for coming to St. Louis, which is my kids who are here today, and happen to produce 2 grandkids that bring me here. And I also work at the same time when I'm here. But my real motivation for coming to St. Louis are these 2 grandkids. So we had
so disappointed.
I know it's hard to believe, but you know, there are priorities.
There are priorities.
But we're still working, and we have another proposal that we're working on with Johanna and with Lisa, and we're very hopeful that we will continue this work for another 10, 20 years.
Yes, but I would like next time to meet in Hawaii or the Caribbean.
Okay, all right. We're working on it.
All right. Yeah. Thank you guys very much.